This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. Find Your Dream Job is brought to you by Top Resume. Top Resumes help more than 400,000 professionals land more interviews and get hired faster. Get a free review of your resume today. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Here's a common question every job seeker gets. What do you want to do next? Corbin C is here to talk about how you can determine what matters most in your next job. He's a career and technology advisor at Boley Welch. It's a B Corp that offers recruiting, staffing, and executive search services. Corbin joins us today from Portland, Oregon. Corbin, let's jump right into it. Now, why is it important to know what matters most in your next job when you're doing a job search?
Yeah, so it's, one of the most common things that I hear when I'm talking to people looking at jobs is, I'm open to anything. And I think the impulse there is to keep yourself open-minded. You don't want to turn down potential opportunities. But what it does is kind of shows that maybe you don't really know what you want. You don't really know what you're looking for. And I think that the reality is that if you don't know what you want, you can't really sell yourself to your next employer. And you're not even going to know who that is. The more that we can define what it is we want from our next job, or even what we don't want, the better we can get to that place. And the better we can really utilize resources along the way.
What do you say to someone, Corbin, who says, well, I know what I want, and I'll know it when I see it. I just want to stay open to all possibilities.
Well, and I totally understand that. But when you have that mindset, I think it kind of misjudges the power balance between a job seeker and an employer, because ultimately it is the employers who are making the choice on whom to hire, and they want to hire somebody who is excited about the job that they are looking for. So if you are just sort of wishy-washy, could do this, could do that, maybe you really could do all those things, but you don't ultimately get to decide which job you get, because we have a job market where as job seekers, we're selling our labor, and we have to sort of have a compelling pitch for why we're a worthwhile hire.
But don't you risk missing out on a great opportunity, Corbin, if you close the doors on certain kinds of jobs?
Well, I mean, personally, I've never been offered an opportunity for a job that I wasn't qualified for or looking for. That may happen for some people, but I think generally, jobs come to people when they kind of have some sort of focus and intention on where they're getting there. If you just leave it all open, you're really putting the burden on everyone else to figure out why they should hire you and why you're worthwhile. It's unlikely that an employer is going to take that time. There's a metaphor that one of my colleagues always likes to use of, if you go up to someone and say, hey, do you have a restaurant recommendation? I'm hungry. They then have to ask a lot of questions on what kind of restaurant? Where are you looking to eat? Do you have a price range? Anything. If you can go up and say hey, I want a breakfast sandwich downtown Portland, then they have something to work with. They kind of know what your focus is. They know what you're interested in. Even if they don't have an answer for you, they can at least give you some sort of useful direction. Otherwise, it's just it puts all this work on them to figure out what they can do for you.
I want to talk about how to figure out what matters most in your next job in a moment. But first, tell us more about the benefits of knowing this. You mentioned what employers are thinking, but tell us more about how this is going to help someone in their job search, Corbin.
Well, ultimately, it's going to be a better use of your time. If you start your job search out just sending resumes out to things that seem interesting, you're going to waste a lot of time applying to jobs that you would never even want if you were to get offered it. If you really focus in on the things that you want first, don't even deal with your resume, don't deal with the job boards, but consider what matters to you in your next position, along with the duties that you've got. You can kind of build a framework for where you might, focus your attentions. And if you can really hone in on, small local businesses that allow work from home opportunities, because that's what you care most about, then you can focus that attention on that and just not even look at all the other opportunities that are out there. So you can really hone in, dedicate time to writing comprehensive cover letters and really doing intentional research and networking with people who might actually have opportunities for you.
So save time, create more targeted, focused applications. Any other benefits come to mind?
Well, you'll definitely be a more compelling hire. the person who comes up to me and says, I'm open to anything, I don't want to hire that person. I don't know why I would want to hire that person. But if I've got a position open and someone comes up and says that they're excited to work that job and they're excited to work for a company just like mine, that's a much more interesting sell for me as an employer. So that would be much more compelling than the person who says, look, I'll just do anything for $1. That's not really a mindset that an employer is very interested in.
And I think some listeners will be surprised to hear that, because I think when people say that, Corbin, to someone at a staffing agency like the one you work at, what they're trying to communicate is a willingness to work. But that's not the message that it's getting across to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would assume that there is a willingness to work if you are looking for work. But again, it's if you just say, I'm willing to work, the onus is really put on other people to determine what sort of work you should be doing. When you know best what sort of work you should be doing based on the experience that you've had. If you know that you've never wanted to, you've hated every family business you've ever worked for, then you would know, like, well, I don't want to work for a family business. And even little bits and pieces of what you can say will help structure it, because anything is it's just too broad, and it's never going to be the case. Even if you're very, very open, you're probably not open to a 3-hour commute to go work $14 an hour somewhere. That wouldn't be enjoyable with almost any circumstances. So just any kind of framework you can structure around your preferred next job will help you get to something. It might not be your ideal. I'm not a big fan of like the dream job sort of rhetoric, because I think that closes people off, but at least having a sense of like what you would be happy with and what you really wouldn't be happy with.
Well, let's talk about that framework. I know one of the steps that you recommend to determine what matters most in your next job is to focus on what you don't want. You actually just touched on that a moment ago. Tell us more about that, Corbin.
Yeah, because I think it can be difficult to really know what you want. There's lots of things that might seem nice, but you can often know what you don't want because you've had negative experiences at some point. So, if you've had a boss who yelled at you in your last job and it really sucked and it sent you home every day miserable, then that a kind, compassionate supervisor is going to be your priority. If you don't care how you're treated at work, you just want to make a bunch of money, that might be your priority. But it's really a matter of which of these things are most important to you. There's two sides to look at this. One side is the job duties. Like, you got to know some sort of sense of like, where does your experience make sense? You can't just have preferences based on salary. And then the other side is the sort of not about the duties, but about the structure of the job itself and the company. There's an acronym that I've been using for years that just kind of summarizes the list of things to keep in mind, which is CLAMPS: challenge, location, advancement, money, people, and security. And these are all sort of things to evaluate what are your real concerns with each of these things, and what matters the most to you when you're evaluating this. If you know that you had a job where you had a very long commute and you hated it, then that location is really crucial to you. Nowadays with the coronavirus, like, it might be that your focus is on remote work and that you don't want to have a commute at all because you don't feel comfortable going out into the world. And there's no hierarchy with any of these things. If you care more about money than anything else, that's fine. If you don't care about money at all, that's fine too. You just kind of have to know internally, at what point would I say no to a job? If something was everything, it checked all the boxes, but this, then like you need to know what that but is so that you could say like, well, this seems great, but I just like can't do a company where there's no advancement opportunities.
So how do you distinguish between the things that you intensely disliked in past jobs and things that, well, you're maybe not crazy about, but there's always going to be a certain amount of routine work in any job?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I would just kind of write everything down and weigh it. Just, give some thought to like, what are the things that like stuck with you? Was it that like, if you went home each day and like the routine of your work was the most frustrating thing, then maybe, routine really is something that you want to avoid. But if it's just a minor annoyance and like you got home at the end of the day and that's not what you're thinking about, but you're bothered that you don't have, enough to pay the bills, then that's where your concern is. So I think sort of like identifying which things do stick with you, and just write them down, weighing them. I always think it's good to write things down when you're doing your job search, and take notes on what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're seeing, so you can really kind of look back on that and see like, well, I told myself at the beginning of the search, this is what I really care about. Is that still true? If so, then I'm going to keep that in mind for the opportunities I'm looking at.
So tell us that acronym again, Corbin. CLAMP. What is
CLAMP.
it? Yeah.
Challenge, location, advancement, money, people, and security. Some of those are, obvious what they are. Some a little less so maybe. Challenge, evaluating, how hard do you want your job to be? Do you want your job to be something that you could just kind of sit back and do because that's not your primary concern, or do you want something that really pushes you all the time? Again, whichever you want is fine. You just have to know it. Like location, I mentioned your commute. Advancement opportunities. This one really often reflects things like the size of a company. At a small business, there might not be any advancement opportunities, period, because there's only 12 employees. Everyone has a unique role. There might not be somewhere to advance. At a larger corporation, there's often a track that you can get into, and you know exactly where you'll get to next. Money, money is important to consider, not just for what you want, but really having an understanding of your value on the labor market. I would love to make as much money as possible, but I understand that based on like the experience that I have and sort of how things pay in the Portland market, there's a certain range where I'm most viable to actually get work. And if you are totally off base with what the value of your labor is, it kind of shows that maybe you don't understand, what you really want. I had a young person who came into our office one time who had been working as like an arborist, doing manual labor sort of work. And he was very determined to become an executive assistant. And he came in and said, like, I'm going to be an executive assistant. I'm going to make 80 grand. And I said, okay, I can't help you get there because you don't have any experience. And the fact that you are demanding the salary kind of shows me that you don't really understand what's going on here. So that it looks worse than if you just didn't say that, or if you'd done your research to understand what an entry-level role might look like. And so it's part of your whole sort of sales pitch to understand what your value is. The people at a company is the company culture. Who's in charge? How do they treat their workers? How do they treat their employees? Do they have diversity initiatives? What do they focus on? What do they care about?
Good. And there's an S too, or was it just CLAMP?
Yeah. Security or stability, this is the difference between like a startup and a corporation that's been around for 100 years. Like, is this company going to be there? Is your job going to be there? Is this a market where there's a lot of turnover and you're sick of finding a new job every 6 months? Or, is this a position where you can kind of settle in for the long term and that, things aren't really going to change? Of course, that one's a tricky one when things change all the time nowadays. I think a lot of companies that were once viewed as stable have changed a bit in the past few months.
They certainly have. I love that mnemonic. That's a great list and great categories for getting clear about what matters most to you. Another tip I know you have when determining what matters most in the next job is to ask yourself questions and to be honest with yourself about your answers to those questions. Tell us more about that, Corbin.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I was saying, really evaluating like what are your what things would you turn down an opportunity for, and being realistic about that. If you know that like, okay, this I would love to work for this company and everything about this seems great, but there's that one thing, you need to know what those things are so that you don't get yourself excited about an opportunity and thinking like, well, if I could just change it, then it would be great. Because you don't, again, there's a power imbalance here. As job seekers, as workers, we don't have the power to change our employers most of the time, especially when we just are starting. We kind of have to like find the best fit for ourselves that we can and hope that we can make the best of it. There will be things that you can't change. So if you see that something is happening at a company, maybe it's, they've got financial instability, everything seems great, but like, their venture capitalist investors might vanish one day and you're scared about that, then it's not the right opportunity for you.
Okay. Well, I want to pause here and take a break. And when we come back, Corbin, I want to talk a little bit more about other questions you might ask yourself as you think about that next job. Stay with us. When we return, Corbin C will continue to share his advice about how to determine what matters most in your next job. Once you know what you want in your next job, it gets a lot easier to customize your resume. That's because you're only applying for the jobs you want, not the jobs you could do. But a weak resume, even when it's tailored for one employer, can still go to the circular file. Don't let that happen to you. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. The professional writers at Top Resume will review your resume for free. Top Resumes help more than 400,000 professionals land more interviews and get hired faster. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. The experts at Top Resume know how applicant tracking systems work. So your free resume review will include suggestions about the layouts and language that the robots like. And you'll learn how to best communicate your skills and expertise. Before you customize your resume again, find out what the experts think. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. Now, let's get back to the show. We're back in the MaxList studio. I'm talking with Corbin C. He's a career and technology advisor at Boley Welch. It's a B Corp that offers recruiting, staffing, and executive search services. Now, Corbin, before the break, we were talking about asking yourself questions and being honest with the answers about what you are most interested in your next job. Any other questions you recommend asking besides those we discussed in the first segment?
I think, it's if you haven't worked a lot of jobs, if you're new to the workforce or if you held a job for a while, it can be difficult to kind of really even know what to look at if you haven't really had variables to be concerned with. So, I think you look at other parts of your life outside of your working life and kind of, evaluate what your comfort levels are. If you're volunteering, like what kind of organizations do you like to be with and how does that impact your day-to-day life? There may be things outside of your working world that you haven't really considered as part of your occupation that, could be part of your next job or could impact how you feel about your next job.
Are there questions you think candidates avoid asking themselves that they should ask that might be difficult or hard to answer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that people are often, maybe hesitant to admit some things like that that they want to be at a company that's just well known, sort of things that maybe they're not proud of. Like I think, sometimes people sort of turn down opportunities because the company is not popular, and maybe you don't want to admit off the bat that like your concern is that you work somewhere that has a good brand name. But again, it's okay. There's nothing good or bad about any preference in your job, and ultimately, most jobs are just they are not good or bad themselves. They just exist within our economy. So there's never really any need to feel guilty about what your real preferences are. If that may be something like you really want a lot of money and you really don't care how you get there. Maybe you're proud of that, maybe you're not. But if that's really what drives you, like, so be it.
How do you recommend people take these answers and apply them into practical steps that they can use in their job search?
Well, I think, I always recommend networking and informational interviews as being a major, if not dominant part of your job search. And when you know what you're looking for and you can kind of define it and structure it, or at least what it might not be, it makes it so much easier for other people to help you. It really, if you reach out to a random person on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm looking for work, they'd have no reason to respond to you. But if you reach out to somebody who's in the field that you're looking for, in a type of company that you would like to work at, and say, hey, would love to connect with you, I'm really interested in the field that you're in, there's a connection already formed there. There's a legitimacy that makes them want to connect with you. They can understand how they might be a resource to you that otherwise they wouldn't even know what to do.
What about volunteer work, Corbin? How can that help you, or even hobbies, determine what matters most to you in your next job?
I mean, I think volunteer work, personally, I think volunteer work is work. If you're spending your time doing something, doesn't matter if it's paid or not, but it can be a good way to try different things and to sort of see what you may or may not like. Plenty of volunteer opportunities are not what people actually want to do, but they might have similar duties or environments to a lot of offices. So if you don't have the opportunity to, or haven't had the opportunity to find a lot of things in companies that you don't like because, again, limited opportunities to work, you're new to the workforce, whatever it may be, doing volunteer work is a good way to sort of see, like, well, how do organizations function in general? Most volunteer work through nonprofits, those are still companies. So you still have the interactions like that.
And I know often when people think about volunteer work, it's a way to grow a network or test a new skill. But some people actually have hobbies that they dream of turning into a job. Do you see any risk in that? Is that Do you risk turning something you love into something that just becomes a routine?
I mean, that's a tough one. Personally, I've gone through this issue plenty of times myself. Like, would I want to try to monetize my hobby? I think that's a hard choice to figure out. Personally, I would not want to. I prefer to keep the things that I enjoy doing, not be what I depend on to function, because it's you got to sell out sometimes. It is what it is. But if you can not do that, it's great. My personal ideal is to have a job that can sustain me so that I can do the things that I want to do and not have to worry about them being, financially stable, because it just changes things. When you're doing work for money versus just because you want to, you ultimately have a client, you have a customer, you have somebody who determines whether or not you get that money and whether or not there's value to the work that you're producing.
Well, I know another tip that you share is to be intentional as you think about what's going to matter most in that next job and to reflect on what matters to you. What do you mean by this, Corbin?
Well, it's really just taking the time to focus on this. So often people that I talk to, they'll say like, look, I've sent my resume out to 400 times and I haven't heard anything. And it's just you're stepping way too far ahead. You need to really take the time to step back, consider these things. Talk to people, talk to friends, get other people's experiences, have that understanding intimately, personally about where you can see yourself next and where you would like to end up, so that you don't just waste the time sending resumes out to things that don't even really matter to you. And I think that it can be really discouraging to send your resume out a bunch of times and never get a response. I think if you kind of have some focus, it can feel a little bit more confident in going out there and doing the search, because you have some semblance of an idea of what you're doing. You can kind of mark off successes. You can plan a route. If you don't know where you're going, you can't plan a route there.
What do you think back about all the work that you've recommended doing here, making these lists, going through the CLAMPS acronym, reflecting on what matters to you? How do you translate all this into something practical that you can use both to set goals and to drive your job search, Corbin? Do you turn it into some kind of statement? What are your practical tips here?
Yeah, I would have a or multiple statements of sort of like, I would like a job like XYZ at a company like ABC, and it's okay to have multiple. It's totally normal, and it's great to think like, I could do this job, that job, or this job, and have 3 totally different things, totally different kinds of companies, but have specific statements of intent for each of those. So if you're reaching out to somebody about graphic design jobs, you have a great reason for why you're excited about a career in graphic design at a company like theirs. If you're also reaching out about ad sales, have a different pitch for that. It's okay to have multiple different directions you're heading in, but keep that to yourself. You don't necessarily want to tell everyone you talk to that you're looking in 3 different directions, but when you find someone who could be a resource to get you in some direction, you want to already have something prepared to, like an elevator pitch, basically, a sales pitch on who you are and why you're trying to get to the place you're going, and what that might look like.
So it's okay to have a short list of goals. You just don't want to be open to everything.
Definitely, and I think it's good to have a short list of goals. Because you don't want to close yourself off, but being open to anything, it's just not true. Again, I could always come up with some sort of gruesome job that somebody doesn't want to do. There are plenty of jobs that I don't want to do that are perfectly innocuous, but I don't want to do them.
Well, it's been a terrific conversation, Corbin. Tell us what's next for you.
Continuing on, we've got a workshop series that I co-host with one of my colleagues every Tuesday, focusing on different elements of the job search, resumes, LinkedIn, interviews, that sort of thing. So we run those every week. Encourage people to come. They're all on Zoom nowadays, so we can accommodate people from all around the world.
Well, I encourage people to check that out. I know they can learn more about those events and the other services that Boley Welch offers by visiting your website, boleywelch.com. And we'll be sure to include that in the show notes as well. Now, Corbin, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about how to determine what matters most in your next job?
Well, I guess I'd say keep in mind that the CLAMPS acronym, because I think it gives a good framework for what to really focus on. You can kind of run through these things one by one and write down your thoughts on each of them. These things I think are a little silly sometimes, but I really believe that anything that can give you some structure for how to discuss and think about issues like this can really help.
Do you want to make your resume better? Get it reviewed for free by Top Resume. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. And make sure you never miss an episode of Find Your Dream Job. Sign up for our free podcast newsletter. You'll get information about our guests and links to resources and a transcript of every show. Go to maxlist.org/show notes. Again, that's maxlist.org/show notes. Next week, our guest will be Ryan Rosenfeld. He's the president of Green Force Staffing. It's a full-service employment agency for the cannabis industry. When a new sector like cannabis appears, it not only offers new jobs, but opportunities for career change and swift promotion too. Ryan and I will talk about these trends and how you can find a job in cannabis. I hope you'll join us. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.